How can you make a multi-ethnic empire prosper with its diverse populations living in harmony? Now that, of course, sounds like a very complicated question, and it would depend a lot on the tensions of shared people groups.
Well, specifically we are going to spend this video going into detail on how the intelligentsia and revolutionaries of the Austrian and later Austrian-Hungarian empires tried to come up with such a solution.
To give some context to the environment in which these ideas could have come into existence, it's necessary that it is explained to you the setting of the 19th century Austrian Empire. Despite the empire planning itself firmly in the Enlightenment in the 18th century under Maria Theresa and the later two emperors, after the Napoleonic Wars it found itself backsliding into the reactionary ways of the Age of Absolutism along with the other conservative monarchies of the continent. Freedom of press, religion, and organizing were once again restricted, though this did not go unnoticed by the intelligentsia and educated unemployed. To secure the new order, among these nations was the Concert of Europe, or Holy Alliance, between Prussia, Austria, and Russia, spearheaded by the Austrian Chancellor Clemens von Metternich. Despite the attempts of this system to keep the ideals of revolution in ruin, these ideas simply continued underground, where in Austria they built more sympathy under the overly bloated yet underfunded imperial army, which made ends meet with ad hoc taxation akin to looting. The common sentiment among the middle and working class across Europe along with the 1840s European potato famine culminated in the revolutions of 1848. The other revolutions are outside the scope of this video, so we'll just stick to those which took place in Austria for now. There were uprisings and revolts on every corner of the empire, ranging from localized peasants' uprisings such as the Galician slaughter, to organized wars of independence as seen by the Hungarian kingdom. Out of this revolution would end many of the early, most radically minded movements for regional autonomy in Austria. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's just try to explain what exactly the United States of Greater Austria was. The name United States of Greater Austria did not exist until scholars near to Franz Ferdinand proposed their idea for federalizing the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the beginning of the 20th century. Instead, keep in mind we are retroactively applying this term to refer to an evolving idea of federalizing the Austro-Hungarian Empire. That being said, we come to our first question. Why did this idea fail?
To say the United States of Greater Austria failed is a bit of a misleading statement, as it was never really a tangible structure in existence that didn't succeed, but in reality was various ideas and proposals which were stomped out in their infancy in the revolving door of Austrian reactionarism, up until Franz Ferdinand's proposal. The early 19th century in Austria saw the rise of multiple ideologies wishing to seek federalization of Austria. One of the most notable early on is that of Austro-Slavism, something in direct contradiction to Pan-Slavism, which was coming into prominence in Eastern Europe at the time. Austro-Slavism sought to see autonomy for Slavic regions of the Austrian Empire, and eventually end of Germano-Hungarian dominance of the local nobility. The idea was virtually extinguished after the Prague Revolution, a pattern that would be seen in most federalist ideologies in Austria during the revolutions of 1848. However, it would gain prominence once again in Franz Ferdinand's proposal.
Taking power after public unrest caused the abdication of his predecessor, Emperor Ferdinand, in 1848, Franz Joseph promptly undid the liberal reforms established in the interim, abolished the democratic April laws in Hungary, and would in 1852 establish dictatorship when he would take over as prime minister. Important to note is that the Hungarian Revolution at the time turned into an all-out war for independence after the revocation of the April laws and complete Austrian defeat would have taken place if it weren't for the intervention of the Russian Tsar Nicholas I as part of the Holy Alliance. The effects of the 1848 revolution in France had a major impact on the new emperor in the years following, seeing that their new liberal constitution inevitably left the lower classes unsatisfied and regardless still led to their overthrowing of the monarchy. Franz Joseph began to see popular political movements as an inherent threat to his livelihood and that of his relatives. While initially Franz Joseph was open to the ideas of minor liberal reforms, all these events ended any hope of that.
With the Holy Alliance made defunct after Austria failed to aid the Russians in the Crimean War of the 1850s, there was no major ally to back the Austrian Empire in its defeat in the 1859 Franco-Austrian War and the 1866 Austrian-Prussian War. With Austria in shambles, at the loss of its leadership in the German Confederation, and at the behest of the new Italo-German regional powers, compromise with its minorities was inevitable. The following year, the 1867 Austrian-Hungarian Compromise took place, thus establishing the dual monarchy. While new Hungarian autonomy was established to a level even before pre-1848 revolution, this would ironically stand as the biggest roadblock to Austrian federalization to come. Hungary would soon move to impose a policy of Magyarization, where it wished to assimilate and authenticate the historic regions of the Kingdom of Hungary, which would situate the Hungarian nobility to oppose new autonomy to other regions of the empire. Lastly, we move on to the last stage of ideas for federalizing the Austrian Empire in the late 19th century and early 20th century. Scholars close to Franz Ferdinand, such as ethnic Romanian Aurel Popovich, proposed a true federal state known as the United States of Greater Austria, which was envisioned as being made up of 15 semi-autonomous states based on ethnic lines, with further divisions for ethnic German and Hungarian exclaves in many states. However, a more conservative movement was preferred by the Archduke himself, known as Trialism, which would instead simply elevate the new Croatian kingdom to the same status as the Austrian-Hungarian realm. Heavily inspired by Austro-Slavism, Trialism was seen as a direct competitor to Serbian and Yugoslav nationalism, which was possibly a reason to make Franz Ferdinand a target for his assassination by said nationalist.
An important perspective on the subject of federalizing the Austrian Empire was that of Austro-Marxists. The defining theory among them on how to deal with ethnic oppression in the empire was a philosophy known as national personal autonomy, or the personal principle. Unlike Orthodox Marxists, who believed ethnicity was a social construct that further divided the classes, Austro-Marxists argued that it was not inherently negative and that all divisions caused by it in society were a product of capitalism. Furthermore, seeing national territory as an arbitrary distinction that divided the classes even further, Austro-Marxists saw subnational autonomous regions as unnecessary, while believing that through national personal autonomy, minor ethnic groups could organize and represent themselves not based on territory, but on their shared identity and values. We would say this idea here is definitely worth considering and is under-discussed in the subject of the United States of Greater Austria. While the idea of the United States of Greater Austria is talked about a decent bit in internet circles, it's mostly in the context of alternate history scenarios, with little focus on what greater lessons are to be learned from the historic issues and the ethnic tension of the Austrian Empire. A separate solution that is, as far as we are aware, wasn't too heavily explored in Austria was that of creating a multicultural Austrian identity. While at first this might seem almost unimaginable due to the specific history of Austria's separate cultures, which developed from their established role under feudal structures, the various levels of hierarchy, there is a contemporary precedent. To the southern border of Austria lay the Ottoman Empire, which itself in the 19th century was attempting to deal with the tension brought by its large minority ethnic groups. In response, the young Ottoman secret society proposed a state where all citizens of the Ottoman Empire would have their legal rights applied equally, regardless of religion or ethnicity. Next would be the secularization of education and free movement within the country, and ideally, as some argued, there would be a new lingua franca associated not solely with the ruling class. In other words, all citizens of the empire would be authentic Ottomans, rather than simply Turks, Greeks, Arabs, etc. Many would argue against this way to solve ethnic tension, as they believe it would inevitably lead to the dominant cultures supplanting themselves over the minor ones, or erasing them entirely. Instead, some think that creating special ethno-religious autonomy is the only way to guarantee the equality and safety of ethnic minorities. This was how the Christians in the Ottoman Empire viewed Ottomanism, of course. Regardless, what do you think is the main conclusion from the failures of the ideas regarding the United States of Greater Austria? And what are the best ways to deal with ethnic tension in the modern nation state? Tell us in the comments.